All right, ladies and gentlemen of the civics world, let's talk a little bit about the Articles of Confederation. It was the first try at a government. Obviously, we needed some work, but it was our first attempt. So let's talk about what worked, what didn't, and what changed. All right, 13 colonies. They officially called themselves the United States. The Second Continental Congress made the decision that they were going to be called states. So you look at where we're at, right about here, compared to all of the colonies. All right, between 1776 and 1780, during the Revolution, each one of the colonies developed their own personality. They basically believed that people should work together, but they wanted to stay individuals. They were afraid of giving the federal government or the national government too much power. In each one of the states, they had all three branches, like Montesquieu had set up with that whole separation of power thing. They had a legislative, executive, and judicial. What's interesting is that only applied at the state level. At the federal level or national level, they didn't have that. So the states were run well, but there was just no oversight. There was nothing to hold all these states together. So what kind of government should we have? The Americans decided they wanted a republic, which means the people get to vote for representatives who make their law. The big thing is they never wanted to go back to having another king. They're like, hey, we don't want another King George. That didn't work out so well. We don't want somebody bossing us around. That's probably why they didn't want a federal government or a national government. All right, people who wrote the Articles of Confederation, they wanted people to group together, but the states would hold on to the power. In 1781, all 13 of the states had approved the Articles of Confederation. Under the Articles, Congress had some power. They could declare war, they could make deals with foreign countries, they could create their own money, and they could operate a post office. Congress was the only branch, or the legislative branch was the only branch that existed at the national level. Here's where they were weak. There was no connection between the states. The federal government or national government couldn't force people or the states to listen to each other. They couldn't collect money, they couldn't create an army, and they couldn't force states to honor trade agreements. Basically, states would make deals with other countries that the national government really didn't want. It'd be kind of like us making deals with Cuba or North Korea now. The national government wasn't helped by these states, but there was no way they could stop them because they were so weak. All right, other weaknesses. Congress only had one body or one group. That's called unicameral. Each state only got one vote, regardless of their size. So a huge state got the same size vote as a small state. Anytime anything wanted to be changed, you had to have all 13 states agree. You guys know it's impossible to get people to agree on anything. So 13 out of 13 to change something made it really difficult to change the articles. Each state could make their own money. It sounds kind of good if you're an art major, but if you want to buy things from one state with your money from another state, it won't work. So each state was charging the other state's taxes. They would basically say that their money didn't work in that state and they had to pay a little extra. Again, there was no president and there was no national court system. So if you committed a crime in one state and you were caught in another state, there was no way of telling what state would have the ability to put you on trial. States like Pennsylvania and Connecticut almost started a war over land, and there was no one to tell them who was right and who was wrong. As it became, we started falling apart. There wasn't any power to hold us together. Thomas Jefferson said that the individual states could end up breaking the country apart. That was on display in a thing called Shays' Rebellion. Up in Massachusetts, they had raised taxes on the farmers. The farmers weren't able to pay what they owed because their income was a lot less than what they were paying out. So the bank was taking their property away. Well, Daniel Shays had a bunch of guns and a bunch of farmers that listened to him. And he said, look, we're not giving up our property. We've got guns, and we know the national government doesn't. So what they did was they stormed or protested against the state courthouses, and they physically prevented the state from taking their lands away. This became known as Shays' Rebellion. It's also the first example of when the Second Amendment, or the right to bear arms, really came into play. It was good for Shay and his farmers, but it was bad for the country because it showed that we had no strong federal or national government to stop these little rebel states from doing whatever they wanted. Basically, we had 13 mini countries. Again, national government had no power. People were worried. What happens if these states just declare riots all over the place? We could have a whole mess of stuff. People became convinced that their government needed to be stronger. So the convention started again, and they said, look, we're going to get back together. They met in 1787, and it was kept top secret because they didn't want the individual states knowing what was going on until they came to a conclusion. That, ladies and gentlemen, is what you need to know, and we'll talk again soon.